My name is Sarah Saleh. I welcome you all to the second part of the session at the Fiqh and Ethics. I ask the attendee to kindly send their question to the chat room or to the Q&A room. We will discuss the question at the end of the session, obviously. And let me start by welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Mohammed Ghaly. Dr. Mohammed is a professor of Islamic and biomedical ethics. At the Research Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics at Hamad Khalifa University in Doha. Okay, I continue. So Dr. Ghaly, please, he will speak about Adab al-Tabib Ishaq bin Ali Rahawi. Dr. Ghaly, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah, and thanks for the colleagues in CILE and for the speakers in the previous session. Today I will present the book Adab al-Tabib, Ethics of the Physician, written by Ishaq ibn Ali al-Rahawi, a physician who lived in Islamic Empire at this time, in the end of the third, the beginning of the fourth century, around the 9th, 10th century. This is the outline of the. This is the outline. This is the outline of my presentation today. I will say something about the author. And then I will speak about the book. Then I will speak about the modern relevance and some critical and concluding remarks. About the book, about the author himself, Ishaq ibn Ali al-Rahawi. He's a physician who lived, as I said, during the 3rd, 4th, around the 9th, 10th centuries. His birthplace, as we see from his title, al-Rahawi, is attributed to al-Ruha. And Al-Ruha is the Arabic name of a city that was known in Greek as Edessa and Syriac as Urahi, and now as Urfa, because it is in southeast Turkey. And I think they have changed the name again to be the Great Urfa or something like this in Turkish, because of the role of the people in the Turkish War of Independence. And this is a photo from the city in our modern time. We have to say that this period, 3rd, 4th century, is one of the important peaks in Islamic history. So we speak more or less about golden age, especially when it comes to scientific renaissance, and knowledge. Roha is one of the centers of knowledge next to Baghdad and others in the Muslim world at this time. His contemporaneous of great figures who lived in the 3rd and 4th century. The Islamic empire at this time was also marked by a great level of diversity, when it comes to the ethnic background of people living within this civilization. So including Roha was representative of this spirit. So we had the Arabs, the Turkish, we had the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, next to each other, especially the profession of medicine. We had different physicians coming from, not necessarily from a Muslim background. This information will be important to analyze some problematic issues that we will come across in the modern time. Ishaq ibn Ali al-Rahawi, we have very scarce biographical information about him. And Nadim in Al-Fihrist and Ibn al-Qifti in Tarikh al-Hukama, they didn't make any reference to him. Ibn Abi Usaybi'a in the 13th century made reference to him, but he made reference to him as one of the quoted authors, so not necessarily information about his life and works and teachers and students and stuff like this. He mentioned him 7 times. He said that وكان عالما وكان عارفا بأعمال Galinos. He was expert in Galen's works, and he said that he wrote good books. He has good works with good quality, 2 on medicine, and the 3rd book is on al-Adab al-Tabib that Ibn Abi Usaybi'a quoted more than once. One of the great controversies around the author is his religious affiliation. What was his religion? And this issue, so we have 3 opinions. One is that he was a Jew, and some said originally from the Jews of Khaybar. Other opinion said he was Christian. Third opinion is that he is Muslim, whether born as Muslim or converted from Judaism or from Christianity later on. This controversy is a continuing one. It's not only an old, it is an old controversy. I will show you the title page of the manuscript, where you see that those who had the manuscript themselves had disagreements about the religious affiliation of the author, but also a modern controversy. Why do we have this? Because we don't have certain information, the scarce biographical information, the time and birthplace of the author. So if we know that Roha was consisting of Muslim inhabitants, so we would know that he was likely a Muslim, more likely Muslim than anything else. If we know that the practicing physicians in Roha at this time were coming from a Jewish or Christian Muslim background, would have been easy. But there is cultural diversity and mosaic that will make it very difficult. How the author himself, the language of his work, I don't mean here Arabic, but I mean the style. So for instance, some of those who said that he is Christian, they quoted his discourse about, or his discussion about alcohol and wine, where he speaks about its benefits, how it can be beneficial, etc. So they said this ease of talking about wine and its possible medical benefits will not be said by a Muslim author. But just if we turn over the pages and we saw the harms of alcohol and wine that he spoke about later on, if you quote this only, you can very easily see and conclude that we have here a Muslim author. So the language of the book, the way he talks is problematic for those who want to get his religious affiliation. The title page of the manuscript, as we can see here, I hope the image is clear. On the title page of the manuscript, we see a line written by seemingly those who had the author or manuscript owned it or had access to it, would say تصنيف إسحاق ابن علي الرهاوي اليهودي الخيبري. So written by Ishaq ibn Ali al-Ruhawi, the Jew from the Jews of Khaybar. And then you will see someone who came later on and he drew a line on al-Yahudi al-Khaybari. He took it out as if he does not agree. So he is just Ishaq ibn Ali al-Ruhawi, not al-Yahudi and not al-Khaybari. So it was a matter of disagreement even from early on. But this agreement about the religious affiliation of the author will be very important for the analysis later on about the spirit of his time and the spirit of the medical profession at this time in general. When we move to the book is available, was preserved in a manuscript. This manuscript, at least one of them, is mentioned that many of the editors depended on in Sulaymaniya, Bukhana. Sulaymaniya Library in Istanbul, and Martin Levy, who translated the book in the 60s, he based himself on this manuscript, and he visited Istanbul to have access to this manuscript. This is how the title page looks like, and first page later on, first folio of the manuscript. The manuscript consists of 112 volumes, and each folio is 17 lines per page. The motivation, why did he write this book? Usually, what was usual at these times is that the author would say, a brother, a good friend of mine asked me to do that or to do this. And sometimes one of the political leaders, this can be the caliph, this can be a regional leader, ask him to do something, and then the author will respond. Here the author is motivated in his own words, as we see this in his own words, almost completely and exclusively by moral motives. He sees that things go wrong in the medical profession. The medical profession, because of its widespread popularity among the people and the possibility that medical practitioners can earn a lot of money, so many people would claim that they are physicians. Actually, they are not. And they would put people's life at risk, etc. All what they care about is gaining money and fame. So he said that those who have the knowledge, the real knowledge, who practice this profession, have a duty in front of God to present the right and proper identification and characteristics of a practicing physician, and to bring the medical profession to its original and normal dignity. The book itself is divided into 20 chapters. He discussed so many issues. I cannot go through all these chapters because there is great overlap among the chapters when it comes to the themes. Will be very difficult to do that, so we will have a thematic overview of the book. In the book, the author mainly addresses two issues. The first one, reforming the profession itself, how this profession should be more professional. And the second part of the book is about reforming the medical the medical practitioner or the medical professional Tabib himself. When it comes to the medical profession, he would write extensively about various epistemological issues. What is human body? How to understand the anatomy of human body? What are the organs? What are the functions of the organs? The basic senses, etc. As it was common at this time, the medicine had adopted a holistic approach, as they inherited this also, at least partially, from the Greek tradition. So it's not only about the organs, not only about the senses, not only about the functions, but it's also about the so-called, at this time, the 6 reasons or states that the physician should consider also the realms, the temples of the life of the person he's examining, like for instance eating and drinking. What does he eat? What does he drink? At what time? What he does not eat, what he does not drink, what he should eat, what he should not drink, etc. Sleeping and being awake, vomiting and clustering, all these rhythms in life, he said, very important, and the physician should pay considerable attention to them. The second is the external factors. The health condition of the person, Al-Ruhawi stressed, is not only about his or her own body, but the environment, surrounding environment as well. So for instance, what kind of house the person is living, what kind of city he is dwelling in, what habits does this person have, what type of air he or she is smelling, what type of water he is drinking, what kind of profession or craft this person is practicing. The physician should have enough information about all these aspects in order to speak about a proper medical profession. The second part book, dispersed again at different sections and chapters, reforming the medical practitioner, Tabib himself. He spoke about the moral character of the Tabib, and like any other person, the moral character of the physician, he approached it through the Platonic trichotomy, which was very famous at this time, also again inherited from the Greek tradition, that the psyche or a nafs contains three main powers: the concupiscent, shahwaniyya, irascible ghadabiyya, and rational aqliyya powers, and how to make balance, how to reach the mean, al-wasat, between these ones, how the rational powers should have more control on the other powers, and how far the physician in particular should have even more control on the concupiscent and irascible power through his or her rational power. And then ethics of clinical encounter, like what we already know in our modern time and what we practice through physician-patient relationship. But the work of Ruhawi showed again the comprehensive character at this time. He spoke about broader network, that the physician deals not only with the patient, but broader network around, so patients' families. Ahl al-Marid, as he said, servants, khadam, visitors, zuwar, pharmacist. He said the one who composes the medicine and the one who drinks him the medicine, etc. Contact person with the physician to communicate the patient's health condition. It seems there was a person to go to the physician and inform him regularly about the health condition of the patient, whether it's improving or deteriorating, etc. A third element, an important element in the work of Ruhawi, was what we now can call qualifying examination, mihna or imtihan. Not everybody who claims that he is a physician should be able to practice physician. He should be tested first. He should be examined. And he spoke more or less about accreditation, endorsed and authorized by the respective authorities, whether in the whole empire or in specific regions or cities, etc. He gave a theoretical framework for this examination, and he gave also very practical dimensions. He wrote letters to the regional leaders in Ar-Riqqa, for instance, showing them how to make this examination for the physicians, with what kind of questions they should be asked, what's the best possible answers for these questions, etc. This is one of the things that we see quite often when people now quote Adab al-Tabib, which he called al-Dustur. Al-Dustur was translated by Martin Levy as the chart, what we now call medical chart or medical record of the patient. Whenever the physician visits the patient, should have a white paper and write down the health condition of the patient, his diagnosis of the physician for the health condition of the patient. On the basis of this diagnosis, what kind of medicine he prescribed for the patient, and then the second time he will say what improved, what deteriorated, why he thinks that things improved or deteriorated, how to fix that, etc. And day by day or every visit would have a record. And he said that this record will be very important for resolving any claims about malpractice, medical malpractice. So if the patient died or lost some of the functions of his organs, etc., and the family were angry, they can always file a complaint. And then the senior physicians will come and check this medical record or this dustur to see if the physician did his work properly, and that that's just a divine destiny, or there is a malpractice and he should be punished for this. And he spoke about what we now call withdrawing the license of the practice of the physician. He said that the physician, for instance, of the punishment that the physician should not practice medicine anymore. It seems that the book, as it was meant for reforming the profession, that it was used by physicians. We don't have so much information, but again, the title page of the manuscript gives us an indication. Here at the left side, at the bottom, very fine writing. It's very difficult with this image to read, but I hope you will believe me that this is what is written. It's one of the physicians of Dar al-Shifa. It's a hospital. One of these physicians wrote, it says, his name Hassan bin Qasim, نظر واستفاد من هذه الآداب إلى لطف الله وعطفه حسن بن قاسم وذاك في خدمة ضعفاء الفقراء الطبيب بدار الشفاء المذكورة في سنة 1979. So here is one of the practicing physicians in Dar al-Shifa. It seems it was in the library of this hospital. He said, I made use of it and more or less I implement this in my work to help the poor people, etc. The modern relevance. I don't know what is the fate of the other works that we will discuss here, but I was asked to discuss the modern relevance of this work, and we are fortunate that there is modern relevance. In the 1960s, Martin Levy, he translated the work of Ruhawi, Medical Deontology in 9th century. He published this in 1966, and then again in 1977 he published it in the title Medical Ethics of Medieval Islam, with special reference to Ruhawi's practical ethics of the physician. And things continued. The work was edited in Arabic in more than one edition. One by Markaz Faisal in Saudi Arabia, other in Iran with different editors, etc. has been quoted in different articles in English. Anyone now who speaks about Islamic bioethics in the modern time, or those who are interested in universal form of pre-modern medical ethics, they quote him, some Arabic articles, etc. The modern works on Adab al-Tabib wa Fiqh, they quote him intensively. I will now conclude and give my own remarks about that. The work of Ruhawi is a good example showing us that public morality or universal morality can be religion-based. It has to do with the spirit of the time he was living in. Ruhawi himself, we don't know for sure if he was Muslim or Jew or Christian or convert, whatever. But he's writing his book for his colleagues who are practicing this position. And these colleagues are not all Muslims, they are not all Jews, they are not all Christian. There is a mix, but they are all religious. And in his book, he said this is what it should be. A good physician is a religious one. He is one who has faith in God, in the Creator. And he wrote some refutations for those who do not believe in God, etc. So we have here public morality that can be used by practicing physicians, irrespective of their religion. He spoke about theological beliefs. That the physician should have firm belief in omnipotent and wise Creator. He is the one who determines the God about health, sickness, life, death, etc. He tried to stress that this theological or religious belief should not and cannot be at the cost of moral rationalism. He spoke about the significance of human intellect. He said this is the most perfect ever of God's creatures. أتم مخلوقات الله. And this is the tool created by God to help people determine what's good and what's bad, so this cannot be ignored by the physician. The very famous statement, what we call now marriage of the two cultures, as encouraged and recommended by the pioneers of modern bioethics, that we need to bridge the gap between humanities on one hand and biomedical sciences on the other hand. And this is exactly what Ruhawi was calling for when he spoke about the books that the physician should read and have in his library. Spoke about the religious books, and he said these religious books are important for improving and refining his moral character and his psyche, nafs. and the medical works for understanding the body, النفس والبدن. The significance of virtue ethics, the work of al-Ruhawi, and how can we call it, revitalizing this work and recentralizing it into the mainstream discourse in Islamic bioethics will be very helpful at this time, because Islamic bioethical discourse is currently dominated by the contribution coming from fiqh, about halal and haram in particular. So I think reconsidering this genre of adab, so we can have al-Adab al-Tabbi, if we may call it, besides al-Fiqh al-Tabbi, virtue ethics is getting centralized in secular bioethical discourse as well, because at the end we came to know that it's not only about regulations, it's not only about policies and guidelines and controlling them. First and foremost, it's about the character of the physician who is going to deal with these guidelines and dealing with the patients. And finally, there's for sure some elements in the book which are now outdated and needs also critical revision. There is a very clear paternalistic tone in the book when he speaks about obeying the physician. So the physician is the one who has the knowledge. So it's a Hippocratic attitude and approach. Things about the involvement of a wide crowd of people who may know some secrets and private information about the patient, which is now problematic in various settings, including the setting of Muslim majority countries, etc. So this is what I wanted to share with you, and I hope it was helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed Ghaly. We have just received the unfortunate news that Dr. Makram Abbes is not going to be with us because unfortunately his father has passed away. I extend my condolences to Dr. Makram, and maybe Dr. Ovamir can start if he is ready. I don't know if he's here.
I'm here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please. The floor is... first I will introduce you. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing the name very well. Is it Ovamir?
You can call it Ovamir.
Ovamir. Okay. Ahlan wa sahlan. So I welcome our third speaker, Dr. Ovamir Anjum. He is a professor chair of Imam al-Khatib of Islamic Studies in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Study at the University of Toledo. And he will be speaking about al-Adab al-Shariyya li Ibn Muflih, 4th century AD. Please start, Dr. Anjum.
All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. It is a pleasure to be speaking to you all, and an honor to be invited to Center for Islamic Legal Ethics, Islamic Law and Ethics. So the topic of what I was asked to do was to present Ibn Muflih's al-Adab al-Shariyya. And I decided to focus on an aspect of his very lengthy work, which is in 3 published volumes today, al-Adab al-Shariyya. I focused on 1 and 2 attributes, one or two virtues or traits that of some several dozen that you mentioned. So the title of my talk is White Lies in Islamic Ethics, Ma'arib in particular. So what I wanted to know was how Islamic ethics and how particularly somebody like Ibn Muflih, and I will explain why Ibn Muflih has an interesting positionality in Islamic tradition, how he would deal with ambiguity. So ethics are about this is good, this is bad, but what do you do when you can't decide because the same thing could be good or bad? And this allows us to understand the nature of ethics, I argue. So let me start. White Lies in Islamic Ethics, Ibn Muflih's curation of the Hanbalite tradition. Ibn Muflih's al-Adab al-Shariyya is a treasure trove of Islamic moral teaching and a study in particular in late classical traditionalist ethical imagination. In the Mamluk world, grateful as it was for having been spared the Mongol apocalypse, the Sunni society took a deeply conservative turn, with exceptional scholarly attention paid to the advancement of hadith and sunnah sciences by all legal and theological schools, producing compendia, syntheses, and historical and comparative works unmatched in any earlier or later period. Judicious compilers from al-Nawawi, the Maqdisis, al-Mizzi, al-Zahabi, the Subkis, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and al-Suyuti all produced works on hadith, fiqh, and history that juiced the enormous intellectual output of the preceding several centuries, sifting through the monumental hadith compilations and theological and exegetical studies that they inherited, and raising them to new heights of intertextual connectivity and criticism. A few towering minds, such as Izzuddin ibn Abd al-Salam, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Khaldun, and al-Tabib, to name a few, produced deeply original works that furnished Islam not only with new scholarly depth, but with new frameworks of thinking about the tradition and the community, recentering revelation and revelational sciences in a way that both built on but also challenged the existing paradigm. Among the most addressed subjects in the writings of this period is devotional ethics, concerned with etiquette, adab, devotion, ta'abbud, psychological virtues or psychosocial virtues, husn al-khuluq, and self-purification, tazkiyah. If Abu Hamid al-Ghazali had lived in the Mamluk realm, perhaps he would not have complained of the dry scholasticism of his fellow jurists and theologians that he allegedly found in his own time. Among the most active and accomplished writers in this period are the Damascene Hanbalites, whose numbers and intellectual capacity had recently swelled, that is, in the century that we're going to be talking about, 13th and 14th centuries of Common Era, due to recent migrations from three important Hanbalite communities: Haran, which is Ibn Taymiyyah's family, Jerusalem, the Maqdisi family, and Baghdad. This essay introduces an important etiquette work by the scion of the Maqdisi family, Ibn Muflih, and places it in its intellectual context. A learned disciple of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Muflih al-Maqdisi, who died in the year 763 of Hijrah, or 1363, I believe, of the Common Era, seems to have been cut from a different cloth, that is, from Ibn Taymiyyah. More fitting within his location in the esteemed Maqdisi dynasty of Hanbalite scholars in Damascus. In contrast to Ibn Taymiyyah's chief disciple, Ibn al-Qayyim, Ibn Muflih appears in this work to have been a more conventional Hanbalite. Although he copiously references Ibn Taymiyyah, his focus is elaborating and organizing the opinions attributed to the school's founder, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. In fact, Ibn Muflih was recognized as the most learned expositor of the Hanbalite community, or Hanbalite school, consulted by the more senior colleagues like Ibn al-Qayyim. And his magisterial works are rightly recognized to this day as among the most authoritative in Hanbalism. Unlike the great intellectual, epistemological, and moral problems of post-classical Islam that so exercised Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim and led them to a critical integration of Sufism, Kalam, and jurisprudence, Ibn Muflih's ethics are largely juristic and traditionist in style, and no hint of Sufi influence. For this reason, and for its comprehensive erudition, Ibn Muflih's treatise gives us a privileged window into certain ethical problems in Islamic tradition and sheds light on the nature of the tensions within it. In order to explore the texture of Islamic ethics in Hanbalite tradition that Ibn Muflih represented, I explore Ibn Muflih's treatment of two ethical traits that are often said to be the cardinal Islamic virtues, one vis-a-vis God, that is repentance, and the other, the cardinal social virtue, truthfulness. I think I'll focus only on truthfulness for now. The first is a central religious virtue, which clearly sets Islamic ethics apart from either Greek or modern Western ethics. The second is a universal virtue shared by all traditions and allows for comparative ethics. An examination of Ibn Muflih's treatment of repentance, I will make a few remarks, throws into sharp relief a few notable points of contrast with the ethics and etiquette works of Ibn al-Qayyim, such as Madarij al-Salikin and others, as well as Ibn Taymiyyah's own works. The most glaring difference is the absence of Sufi concerns and authorities. Ibn Muflih's substantial chapter on repentance, a significant concern among the Orthodox Sufis, forms a notable part of this massive 3-volume treatise, but contains almost no Sufi reference. A brief analysis of this chapter allows us to understand Ibn Muflih's style, authorities, and concerns. Apart from the Quran and Hadith reports, his main authorities, approximately in order of frequency of reference, are as follows. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, whose terse responses to incidental questions are subjected to systematization through the commentaries of the school's foremost authorities. Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, whose death in 728, Ibn Muflih would have been in his teens, that is at the time of his death, but was recognized and praised by him as a prodigy. He would have been in his teens at the time. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah is referred to as Shaykh Taqiyuddin rather than Shaykh al-Islam, and he is nonetheless the most frequent reference in resolving doctrinal complexities whose resolution is at times preferred even to Ibn Hanbal's own opinion. The third authority is Baghdadi scholar al-Samidi, and particularly his work al-Mustaw'ab, which is a compendium of the Hanbali law, consulted for definitions and such. Baghdadi master Abu al-Wafa ibn Aqid, whose work Usul al-Adab wa Makram al-Akhlaq al-Mashru'a, as well as his magnum opus of legendary length, al-Funun, some 80 volumes or something, I think. Harrani's Hanbali Ahmad ibn Hamdan, and Baghdadi preacher Abil al-Jawzi. And finally, Baghdadi Hanbali Abu Ya'la al-Farra. So these are some of the main authorities in order of appearance and frequency of reference. The non-Hanbalis mentioned, actually I will skip a little about this in order for us to be able to focus on what I think is quite interesting section which allows for comparative insight. Truthfulness and its limits, ma'arid, which can be more precisely translated as ruses in English, but it has a broader connotation, as we'll see. So ma'arid as a way out of line. White lies or ruses. Truthfulness is a fundamental moral commitment in Islam, as well as in the Hellenistic and other moral traditions in the pre-modern world that came to heavily inflect Islamic ethics. Modern mainstream Western philosophers It's important to specify this since all fields are now comprise warring tribes, and so there are differences. But I'm simply going to generalize here. Remain concerned with truth as a useful ethic. Having lost any ultimate grounding for morality, most non-theistic philosophers consider morality a useful fiction. Among the most insightful treatments on the practical limits of truthfulness remains the famous humorist Mark Twain's treatment of the subject in 2 essays, which, as one scholar recently noted, contain the most original things ever written about lying. Twain observed frankly that the right thing to do is to discern, quote, what sorts of lies are best and wholesomest to be indulged, seeing as we must all lie, and we do all lie, and what sorts it may be best to avoid. Only children and fools tell the truth all the time. What Mark Twain means by lying is a rather extensive range of things, including the silent lie, which he claimed was the most common kind of lie. When a woman proud of always being truthful in a gathering challenged Mark Twain, he probed her until she acknowledged that she had lied just that day by filling out a form evaluating a kind and competent nurse taking care of her baby and leaving her answer about negligence blank, even though she believed that the nurse left the baby uncovered for too long while making the baby's bed. This fact, the woman had thought, need not be mentioned. This gesture that most would consider noble to Twain is a silent lie. This was a deceptive, silent lie, even if well-meaning. Another kind of lie Twain discovers is not deceptive at all. To fail to acknowledge to a friend that you were offended by his remark is a non-deceptive lie. On this exaggerated definition, lying might even be a virtue at times. Lying is not limited to words. Its ambit includes gestures. There are also lies that are true on the surface but intended to mislead, with or without malice. Twain reports that he once told the police that he belonged to the same family as the Prince of Wales, when he silently meant the human family. This Twain calls modified lies an unimaginative label that can be better replaced with ruse. Finally, there are well-meaning, pleasing lies, something sometimes called white lies, the mildest version of which could be this. We say we are truly grateful for something for which we are not, in fact, grateful. So we have the following distinctions in classes of lies from Mark Twain. The silent versus spoken lie, deceptive versus non-deceptive lie, gestural versus spoken lie, modified versus literal lie, and pleasing versus malicious lie. In all of these instances, Twain's list still assumes that all lies are intentional. Let us now turn to Ibn Muflih's treatment of the limits and ambiguities of social truthfulness, in particular the issues to which his juristically inflected ethics dedicate most space, ma'arib, or ruses. Let us begin with the definition of a lie, kadhib, which in the prophetic language is inclusive of the non-intentional misinformation. This Ibn Muflih declares to be the doctrine of Ahl Sunnah, in contrast to the approach of some Kalam scholars who consider intentionality to be necessary to lying. Compared to what we have seen in Mark Twain above, then, the connotation of kadhib is broader than its usual meaning as intentional misstatement of fact. It includes more than lying, or what we call in English lying. It includes unintentional error. The attempt at definition through a selection of reports appears somewhat belated in the section on lying. We learn here that the intention is not a necessary element of lying, which is why the Prophet, peace be upon him, explicitly added ta'ammud, intentionality, at times when warning about punishable lying. On the question of whether lying could be about the future, there is some ambiguity in the hadith reports. Should a promise one makes but does not intend to or fails to keep be labeled a lie? Ibn Muflih produces evidence against it, suggesting that only statements of fact, past or present, can be called lies. Ibn Muflih's collection of reports and commentaries is not ordered along a clear scheme, starting with definition and proceeding with explanations. Rather, it moves through a series of questions, each addressed through reproduction of relevant hadith traditions, followed by authoritative scholarly commentary. In order to organize this material in a theoretical framework, I classify the report from commentaries into a few classes. In the first class are those reports that emphasize the absolute virtue of truthfulness and evil of lying. Let us call these the absolutist reports. In the second class are those where the definition of lying is extended to include spreading of rumors and careless reporting. Let us call this class of reports intensification of prohibition. A third class of reports are the well-known occasions when the prohibition on lying is liable to relaxation. Finally, a fourth class of reports are those where a permissive attitude toward utilitarian lying is suggested. The first class of hadith reports is straightforward. Truthfulness is the fount of all righteousness, leads to high ranks with God, and lying is the fount of all wickedness and path to hell. The second class of reports that intensify the harm of lying includes reports that declare that lying was the single most hated vice to the Prophet and his companions. And numerous traditions list lying as the signature of a hypocrite, one who is not a believer but only pretends to be one. A woman who pretends to have received a gift from her husband to make her co-wife envious is declared a wrongful liar, in a hadith in al-Bukhari. Lying in jest, in order to elicit fun and laughter too, is damned. In one report mentioned earlier, lying even to romance one's wife is discouraged, but promises and flattery are permitted. I'll bring you the moon type of thing is okay because she knows you won't. Finally, the most strident warnings occur in reporting lies on the authority of the Prophet, upon whom be peace. Whoever reports on my authority something he knows to be a lie is one of the liars. So merely reporting something that one knows to be a liar, even though one did not fabricate it, is wrong. And the well-known warning that whoever lies about me knowingly shall make his place in fire. This is considered one of the mutawatir reports, one of the ones that are multiple. Its chains of narrations go up to dozens. These warnings are relaxed when reporting from the Israelite tradition, presumably because the believers do not rely on it for authority, only for religious enrichment, aware of the possibility of its error. Here Ibn Muflih glosses, including invoking the authority of a Shafi'i, that the relaxation is only about those reports whose falsehood is not known. This high bar in the second class of reports, no lying even in jest, is adjusted in some prophetic reports when the Prophet himself uses clever ruses to joke. As when he tells an old woman who wishes to enter paradise, no old woman will enter paradise, then telling the befuddled woman that her youth will be restored before she enters paradise. Similarly, he tells a man who asked for a camel that he could only give him the child of a camel, and then disclosing to the dejected man that all camels were children of other camels. In these cases, a half-truth is used to create a humorous yet benevolent tension, which is then immediately resolved. This is to be differentiated from humor in which malicious lies are told to have a laugh or fun at others' expense. Now, a third class of reports include those that mitigate the prohibition of lying by naming 3 exceptional circumstances when lying is permissible: love, war, and peacemaking. Numerous hadith reports are given by Ibn Muflih to establish that lying is explicitly said to be permissible in 3 cases: to make peace between 2 Muslims, and then it is debated whether it is permissible to make peace even between non-Muslims; to please one's wife or spouse, and the use of stratagem in war in order to misdirect the enemy. However, there is debate about whether these lies are true lies, as in actual misstatement of fact, or merely ruses, ma'arid. Some reports suggest that the Prophet said to a man who sought permission to lie to his wife, "There is no benefit in lying," said the Prophet. But when asked permission to romance his wife by making promises and saying colorful things, the Prophet permitted that. Does this mean that no actual lying is permissible even under exceptional circumstances, but only ruses or strategies that misdirect or disclose only part of the truth? This is one possible interpretation. This was Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri's understanding, who said that the Prophet has never, and in another report says, no religious authority in Islam has ever permitted what people call lying. Rather, what they permit is ma'arib, ruses. This statement appears in the context of the following hadith report that Ibn Muflih records: "A liar is not one who makes peace between people, saying good things or increasing good news." Found in al-Bukhari and Muslim and elsewhere. Other authorities, such as Ibn al-Jawzi, adopt the other extreme. That is, on the one extreme, you have people like Ibn al-Zuhri and Ibn Taymiyyah, and others like Ibn al-Jawzi, who adopts the other extreme of permitted utilitarian lying rather freely. Here we note that at least 2 further questions could be contested. Could be asked: is outright lying ever permissible, or only ma'arid? And all these 3 exceptions the only ones, or simply examples of the kind of lies or ruses that are permissible? In other words, can these 3 classes be extended to include any and all well-intentioned lying? To address these, Ibn Muflih characteristically offers hadith reports and authoritative opinions to support various conclusions, but gives no decisive answers. A 4th class of reports seems to contrast with the strident prohibition of the 2nd class of reports, and stretches the permission granted in the 3rd class of hadith reports to such an extent that it begins to appear utilitarian. These reports are primarily Quranic, as the Prophet Abraham, the only one that Ibn Muflih mentions, and one may add anecdotes featuring Prophet Joseph and Solomon, who all employ ma'arid, ruses, in order to fulfill their missions. Abraham claims to be sick, Saqim, in order to break the idols and then make a point about their helplessness. And the Prophet Muhammad declared these to be one of the 3 occasions when Abraham lied. In each case, Abraham's lie turns out to be a ruse, for the truth is discovered shortly after and the moral lesson is uncovered, which means that the Prophet is using the widest definition of lying here, inclusive even of permissible ruses. The Quran also mentions a similar ruse by Joseph to keep his full brother with him and force his half-brothers to return. In these verses, Joseph does not explicitly lie, but hide the king's cup in his brother's luggage, allowing the misunderstanding to play out in his favor, and taking advantage of the law, keeps his brother to himself. Ibn Muflih does not mention these examples, these rather revealing Quranic examples, which actually would have allowed him to clarify some things, which suggests his focus on hadith reports. He does mention a hadith report in which a companion lies, claiming that he had a dispute with his father, had nowhere to live, and then goes to live as a guest to a righteous Medinan man, was declared by the Prophet to be a man of paradise, in order to stay with him for a few days to find out the virtue that earned this simple man this great honor of prophesying for 3 days in a row that he is a man of paradise. Now, this incident takes a well-intentioned lie to its extreme. That is, the lie is maintained for a whole 3 days in order to learn a virtue. In this last case, the sought-after virtue is found to be benevolence or goodwill toward all people. Even though the Prophet is not involved in the report, that is, the Prophet does not say this was the right thing to do, the assumption in the pious ethical literature is that such a well-intentioned lie, not merely a ruse, would be permissible. The scholarly resolution to these tensions range from the Ash'ari-influenced Hanbalite Ibn al-Jawzi's utilitarian opinion, with being on the one end of the spectrum, who declares the principle to be, quote, lying to attain any praiseworthy goal that cannot be otherwise attained is permissible. If the goal is an obligation, so is lying to attain it. On the other extreme, or end of the spectrum, we have the Mu'tazili-influenced Hanbali, Abu al-Khattab, who declared lying to be an inherently evil act that is impermissible in all cases, yet one that becomes a lesser evil in cases where it is direly needed, such as to save an innocent person's life. Ibn Muflih's lack of theoretical curiosity is indicated by his description of Ibn al-Jawzi's utilitarian opinion. If consistently followed, lying would appear to be no different from truth-telling. It is only the result that would determine its permissibility. As such, it is not clear whether lying, in Ibn al-Jawzi's opinion, is any different than drinking a cup of water or riding a horse. Good if the purpose is good, necessary if the goal is necessary, and bad if the end result is bad. Ibn Muflih begins his entire discussion with Ibn al-Jawzi's opinion, but does not make it clear whether his later presentation is meant to disqualify Ibn al-Jawzi's permissivism or endorse it, because of Ibn al-Muflih's extensive discussion of reports after quoting this opinion from Ibn al-Jawzi could be interpreted one way or the other. In contrast to Ibn al-Jawzi, Ibn Muflih's extensive presentation cites reports from the more theoretically astute traditionalists, ranging from Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri to Ibn Taymiyyah, who adopted extreme caution against lying and avoided drawing loose utilitarian conclusions. Now, this presentation throws into sharp relief the virtues and limits of traditionalist ethical analysis. The lack of theoretical rigor potentially turns every virtue into a bleached, result-oriented instrument to attain pious goals. But theoretical analysis was often not the forte of traditionalist ethics. It was emulating the Prophet's conduct, in particular cases that formed the virtues that the traditionalists defined. So this also, I think, allows us to summarize, I think, with some interesting points that could be further discussed here. One, the distinction between fiqh and ethics. Here Ibn Muflih shows that really there is no difference between fiqh and ethics. That in fact, one could do ethics just as a branch of fiqh, doing the same kind of, the same authorities, Ibn Hanbal, the eponym of a school, and similar kind of discussion to figure out what Ibn Hanbal really meant here, like people do in fiqh manuals. So figuring out the right ethical opinion in the same way that one figures out a right legal detail. Yet at the same time, what's interesting is the treatise is called al-Adab, al-Shariyya, which means that there is a distinction in the mind of Ibn Muflih and the traditionalists between fiqh proper and the adab type of fiqh, fiqh that is concerned with psychosocial virtues, which is different from the fiqh of tahara or salah or jihad or zakat. So there can be a sort of some kind of compartmentalization, but nonetheless the methodology is the same. It also shows that fiqh ethics, of course, could be done in different genres. So ethics could be done in the genre of fiqh. It could be done by the same group of people. Ibn al-Qayyim, for example, as I pointed out earlier, is very much influenced by Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Taymiyyah's concern with reform and with tasawwuf. So Ibn al-Qayyim's discussion of the same issues is much more colored with tasawwuf as well as intellectual, philosophical, and kalam-oriented discussions in addition to fiqh, whereas for Ibn Muflih, it is strictly fiqh alone. And finally, I think, as I made this point earlier, that fiqh could become, if you apply, when these two genres of fiqh and ethics are treated with exactly through the same lens as legal discussion, then it is possible to end up dissolving ethics into merely utilitarianism. Because when you think about fiqh of mu'amalat, legal discussions, they are really primarily about utility and they're result-oriented. And if one treats lying and truth-telling or other virtues in the same way, then they end up similarly utilitarian acts. So I think that with these few, I will end my discussion. We're happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ovamir. Now we open the discussion. I already have 3 questions for our both speakers. The first one comes from Tuhami Bashir to Dr. Mohammed Ghaly. The question goes, in Chapter 6, it is stated what the doctor should consider of single and combination medicine and how should be aware of what may have been spoiled unintentionally or intentionally by the pharmacist and others. Does this mean that the physician had authority over the pharmacist at that time? Dr. Ghaly, please.
Thank you so much. What I could understand from the work of Ruhawi and his contemporaries at this time is that usually the physician was also involved in what we call cognate fields. So Ruhawi himself wrote about medicine, about pharmacy. So usually we didn't have this clear distinction between medicine on one hand and pharmacy on the other hand. But it is clear also in his work that the one who has the upper hand is the physician, because he is the one who prescribes the medicine. And in his work, he spoke about the one who composes, who prepares the components of the medicine, and the one who administers the drinking of the medicine. And he mentioned etiquettes for this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, second question, also from the same attendee, but Dr. Ovamir. It says that the compiler, may God have mercy on him, mentioned a set of etiquette that has nothing to do with the Sharia, rather than with social etiquette and exist according to the norms prevailing in the society. And it is from which there is no text in terms of approval or invalidation, and it is included in the section of permissible, so there is no need for Sharia referendum on it. To what extent can the book of Ibn Muflih who died in the year 736, Hijriya, of course, be considered a central source in Islamic ethics, and considering the author of the book as one of the founders. Dr. Ovamir, please.
So a couple of things. Muflih died in 763, by the way, 1363. But the idea that lying, for example, and ma'arid is not part of Sharia, it's at least not something that I can understand. Of course it is part of the Sharia, because Muslim jurists proceed with the assumption that every single act, in fact, every single human act that has any deliberate act, has a Sharia ruling. It doesn't even need to be a moral act. Even the act of cleaning yourself, after using the bathroom, that's an act about which the jurists have an opinion. So when it comes to supremely moral acts, such as lying or truth-telling, or when to lie, when not to lie, that's a supremely Sharia act. Now, one thing I should say, that the meanings of Sharia, the term Sharia, have evolved over time. So, for instance, in the early centuries, you see that people use the term deen versus Sharia, or Shara'i actually more often than the word Sharia. And by Shara'i, they mean specific laws of Islam. But by the middle period, that is by the Mamluk period that we're talking about, the word Sharia has acquired a broader connotation of a system which is all-inclusive. And this is the way in which the circles in which Ibn Muflih is writing use the word Sharia. All normativity, and Weber Johansson, for example, at Harvard, translates the term Sharia as normativity, everything that should be or should not be. Although even normativity doesn't quite include everything in Sharia, because there could be a norm which is, well, I guess it could include, but something that is not seen as moral, nonetheless, merely a habitual act, such as clipping your nails, could become a judgment of Sharia, because it includes mustahab and makruh, liked and disliked as well. So in that sense, you could say that if you're using the word Sharia in a strictly legal sense, then ethics perhaps are on the margins of Sharia. But in the way that it is used by Ibn Muflih, by Ibn Taymiyyah, by the Mamluk period jurists, Sharia is it's an all-inclusive term. In fact, one of the fundamental claims and projects, one could say, of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim was to say that tasawwuf is part of the Sharia and siyasa is part of the Sharia, which is why the treatise by the name of al-Siyasa al-Shariyya appears, which is to push back against the claim that was being made at the time by the ruling class that the Sharia of the jurist is incapable of giving us guidance on ruling, that in fact they needed to copy other methods, Mongol Yasa or Yasap, in order to complement Sharia, especially when it came to violent crimes. And the Siyasa al-Shariyya was written in order to say that no, in fact, Sharia, the limits of Sharia are in fact compatible with effective governance in politics. Similarly, in Tasawwuf, that you can read the Quran and understand your psycho-social and spiritual sort of states and guide them just the same way, rather than so this is a pushback against the haqiqah versus sharia distinction that Sufis were many Sufis upheld, and so this is a contested issue in that sense.
Okay, thank you very much. I have too many questions. I hope you can answer them all, but I have a few questions to Dr. Ovamir. Before I will give the floor to Stefan Christo, because he wants to ask his questions himself, right?
Thank you, Sarah. So I first to Professor Ghaly, it's on wine, and I don't think mentioning wine in a positive sense would disqualify someone as a Muslim author. We have a long passage in Abu Zaid al-Balkhi's Masalih al-Abdan wal-Anfus. I think he might be perhaps a younger contemporary, and so in that passage he lavishly praises the effects of wine. So this was integrated into Islamic medical and in a larger sense ethical and psychological literature. I also have a question to you. Is whether in any medical text have you ever seen references to Burzawaihi, Burzuya, the physician doctor who Fasanian who translated the Kalila wa Dimna? I just wonder whether they considered him at all.
What's the name?
It's Burzawaihi, Burzuya, Burzawaihi, so on. And I also have a comment for Professor Anjum. I'm slightly I'm very much still under the influence of the news from Professor Abbes' family, so it's hard to concentrate. But what I heard that on lies, and you might find interesting that in the Risala fi Sahaba, which is really an early text, there is a reference to lie, and it is not. It is he uses an example as an evidence against qiyas, like blind analogical reasoning, and what he says is that he uses an example as a kind of evidence that lies in some circumstances are necessary, and the example he says is that if someone asks you about a fugitive in order to catch him, would you not lie? And the implied obvious reason is that you must lie in those circumstances. So he uses this as argument in law. And that is interesting that it seems that this argument on a lie about a fugitive has classic roots in classical Greek literature. And interestingly, as it happens, it was also a case in Ibn al-Muqaffa's life that he is reportedly was there when Abdul Hamid al-Khatib was arrested and then killed, and they asked the henchman coming for him, asked who is Abdul Hamid, and Ibn al-Muqaffa said that I am the one. So he effectively lied, a very wide lie, but they didn't believe him and didn't kill him then. But killed Abdul Hamid.
Oh, very interesting. I did not know that.
Okay, Dr. Ghaly, start answering, please.
Thank you. The point about how Ruhawi spoke about wine, yes, you are right, and I'm sure there must be many others who handled it in the same way. The point I mentioned is in the modern discourse. Some people in the modern discourse came to the conclusion that he is Christian because he spoke in this way about wine, someone who doesn't think that it is one of the major sins, al-kaba'ir, etc. But to my mind, I think that he spoke about it as physician. That's it. So he speaks about the benefits and the harms. So he enlisted the benefits and he enlisted the harms. He himself came to the conclusion by comparing the benefits and harms. We come to the conclusion that it is a bad thing. But the problem in the modern discourse, we try to project our own presumptions on people who may not share with us the same setting in which they wrote their works. About the Burzawi, I didn't see his name quoted in the work of Ruhawi. Ruhawi based his work on two types of sources. The first source is the Greek tradition. So we had three works of Ghaly translated into Arabic, available to him. We had many of Ghaly, three sources of Hippocrates, and we had many sources of Ghaly. He quoted them very much, but of course Hippocrates was much more specialized in ethics than Ghaly himself. The second type of source was his own practical experience. It's very clear that he was a practicing physician. And he's speaking about a profession that he knows very well. And he interacted with the regional leaders. He wrote to them about the things that he's not happy with. He asked for their intervention at the level of the state to regulate and accredit good physicians and discontinue the license for bad physicians, charlatans, etc. So these are the two main types of sources that I found quite dominant in his work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There was a question to Dr. Anjum also, no?
Well, it was just this. It was just the discussion about the life.
Okay, so we move on. I have two people who want to ask their questions themselves, but before I will read one more question. A question from Riza Al-Akbari. I think it's to Dr. Ovamir. Is it permissible to interpret it Saqim in Abraham's words in spiritual context? In other words, he meant, I am sick because of your paganism, but they understood him as he was the condition of physical sickness.
Right. The short answer is yes. It is among the ma'arid. It is a ruse. Or what we may say in English, a misdirection or a ruse, or a lie that is crafted to create a tension that is then resolved. So it would not be considered a lie, but remember the definition, the prophetic definition of lying, kadhib, which we assume was certainly we have attestation in the words of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that somebody was wrong and the Prophet would say kadhib, that instead of saying that and the person did not intend to lie because they didn't know about this. So for example, somebody said that such and such person is hellfire, and the Prophet would say, no, you have lied, this person is in fact in paradise or something like that, and this person, of course, did not intend to lie. They were simply in error. And there are many other cases that shows that the word kadhib is inclusive of error and also of ma'arid. And this is the opinion of Az-Zuhri and Ibn Taymiyyah and others when the Prophet uses the word lying. There's a hadith in al-Bukhari that says that Abraham lied on 3 occasions. And this is how they interpret that hadith, that in fact those were not truly lies.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I will give the mic to Dr. Aryan Post. He wants to ask the question personally.
So, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, that's good. So, Dr. Anjum, thank you very much for your talk on Ibn Muflih. And since I myself am also completely immersed into the Hanbali school, it was very beneficial for me, and I was especially interested in your conclusion where you refer to Ibn Muflih's ethics as a form of fiqh, and it reminded me of a statement made in, I believe, chapter 1 of Professor John Hoover's Theodicy of Perpetual Optimism, where he says that perhaps a way to look at the theology of Ibn Taymiyyah is to view it as theological fiqh. And I was playing, actually for my paper for tomorrow, I was playing with this idea that perhaps the same goes for his views on Sufism, and perhaps this also goes for Ibn al-Qayyim, that in a sense they have a Sufistic fiqh. Maybe this is not a good term, but let's just use it for now. And what I mean then is that they're trying to find the appropriate way to use Sufi terminology and to talk about spirituality, but always in line with their understanding of Sharia, I guess. Like you said, that for them Tasawwuf is part of Sharia. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that, and if you think this is sort of in line with the way you're approaching Ibn Muflih's ethics.
Right, excellent question, thank you. And certainly that reference to Hoover's idea that Ibn Taymiyyah deals with theology like fiqh. Well, I think there is something deeper there, and there is a book, or at least a paper, that needs to be written about it, which is the following. Ibn Taymiyyah rejects the classical Ash'ari distinction between, that theological sciences are qat'i and fiqh is dhanni. He says, in fact, this is completely arbitrary. You actually have the same epistemology. We know with far more certainty that there are 5 prayers, which is a fiqh issue, but we do not know about issues such as divisibility of atom and all of these things that are supposedly usuli issues. So he rejects the distinction between, in these different discourses in which one sort of assumes qat'i evidence and then dhanni evidence in others. So that is why I think, what one could say that his project is an epistemological unification. That in fact one does all of these different things in the same, with the same kind of epistemological plane. One doesn't say that when I'm in this epistemological plane, the evidence is somehow categorically different. It isn't. It's the same kind of thing. One interprets reason, revelation, one uses reason, one uses empirical data, and that is why they don't distinguish between, when they're doing ethics, for example, they're going to do the same way that they're doing fiqh. And you're right that they include what we'd call tasawwuf. Of course, they don't accept that as tasawwuf being a sort of an extraneous, to the extent that tasawwuf is an extraneous discourse, they are critical of it, but the insights of tasawwuf, especially the love of God and the psychological dimension of tasawwuf, is internalized totally in Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim in the way that it is not in Ibn Muflih, right? It's very clear when he's doing ethics, for him it is much more almost an extension of a legal manual. That, some people say lying is this, well, let's define lying, and let's say, these are the hadith reports. There isn't there isn't any concern with psychology, with the psychological unity of the human being. How could you have this and that at the same time? And an example I give for that is when discussing Ibn al-Jawzi's opinion, which really, you could almost see Ibn Muflih writing, as we would say in English, with a straight face, and you would wonder, how could anybody write that and not comment on this? That this comment turns lying into drinking a cup of water. There's no difference. But then Ibn Muflih qualifies that by giving several reports, never directly concerning himself with Ibn al-Jawzi. Now, somebody like Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn al-Qayyim, they address those things very directly. That in fact, you have a human being has a psychological social unity, and therefore you cannot treat lying in the same way, lying and truth telling in the same way as a mundane act just that has some benefits and harms. Why? Because you have your sidq to Allah, your truthfulness to Allah. So basically, in the theological realm, if you ask Ibn al-Jawzi in the theological discourse, he would never say that lying and truth-telling is simply a utilitarian thing, right? This is very much an adab thing. Whereas for Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim, you cannot make that distinction. In tasawwuf, sidq to Allah is everything. And so, so that's what I'm trying to say, that there is some epistemological unification that takes place at this time, and then it becomes more common than Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim, quite common, even in Hanbali fiqh. But nonetheless, this is why I find him very interesting, because he doesn't seem to have it.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. I still can take two questions. First one I will read myself. The second one is from Dr. Mu'taz. He asked to ask it himself. So first I will read the question from Muhammad Fadil to Dr. Anjum. Does Ibn Muflih discuss the issue of whether a public official can lie? Could one say that the difference between ethics, adab, and fiqh is that the former is always particular and the latter is universal?
Well, I think that, one could certainly say that, but Ibn Muflih does not seem to theorize at all. He doesn't rise to the level where he makes general statements about adab and fiqh. In fact, in his mind, he's doing fiqh. It's just an extension of fiqh. He's simply looking at statements about truth that have been reported about ma'arid, and that's why I commented that fiqh is in a sense, or this adab or akhlaq is an extension of fiqh for Ibn Muflih, and there is an awareness of distinction only in the genre, so that you're writing about al-Adab al-Shariyya. Obviously, you know that it's not the same thing as Tahara, for example. You don't have Tahara chapter in this book. But other than that, in the method, I don't see any difference, any recognition of what a public official might do, and what there is no domain of siyasa, at least in an explicit way in Ibn Muflih's mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Mu'taz al-Khatib, you asked to ask your question yourself. Please, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarah. First of all, I have just a quick comment on Dr. Ghaly. I think it would be a benefit if you add a section or compare between the works of Abu Zayd al-Balkhi and Abu Ishaq al-Ruhawi, because both of them are contemporary to each other, and both of them were influenced by Galen, as you know. But it's important to understand the scholarship at their time and especially that we are among a Mu'tazili scholar and we are not sure about the Ruhawi. So it might be useful here to have this comparison. As for Dr. Anjum, I think I still find it problematic to say that ethics and fiqh are the same in the view of Ibn Muflih. Let's avoid the problematic. We all know what fiqh is, but we might have different opinions what ethics is. So to avoid these problematic terms, ethics, Sharia, ethics and Sharia, I think it's important here to understand what is the view of Ibn Muflih and about the distinction between ahkam and adab. Because this book is on adab, Sharia, religious adab. And we were talking about al-Adab by Ibn Muqaffa, so we have different, and this is why it's called religious adab, adab Sharia, to differentiate between his genre, the genre that was written by religious scholars, and the genre was written by other non-religious scholars. So, and he is not the first one, of course, that he started this, but he's trying to Hanbalize or to build the Hanbali view of adab. And this is why he was very clear because he wrote al-Furu' in fiqh and he wrote al-Adab Shariyya as a parallel to ahkam. So now, how do you see ahkam and adab within the Islamic tradition? In his view, this is another issue. But he was clear that, about when he said in his introduction that he mentioned that هذا كتاب يشتمل على جملة كثيرة من الأدب الشرعية ويحتاج إلى معرفته أو معرفة كثير منه كل عالم أو عابد وكل مسلم وقد صنف في هذا المعنى كثير من أصحابنا. So he's referring to that the content, the substance of this book is needed to be known by everyone, every Muslim, whether it's he is a scholar or lay people. So actually, this is part of the tradition that was he's contextualizing his book within the context was some Hanbali scholars wrote on. And the most important sentence that he said later, that when he said وعلم أنه قد علم من الفوائد المحتاج إليها ما لم يعلم أكثر الفقهاء أو كثير منهم لاشتغالهم بغيره. So he's saying that the content, the substance of this book is not known by many Muslim jurists. So what is that? Is not known by the jurists themselves, because they were busy in a different time, which is ahkam actually. So the key point, I think we need to draw the lines or the borders between what is called adab shari and what is called ahkam shari'iyya. And it's interesting here to compare between al-Furu' and al-Adab shari'iyya both by Ibn Muflih, to understand what does not fit with Furu' ahkam and it fits with adab, and vice versa. Thank you.
Okay. So there is a question which actually goes well with Dr. Mu'taz's comment, which is, what is the ground for saying something is the same or something is different? I mean, ultimately it comes down to this question of convention and context and semantics. When I say that he is engaging in fiqh in this ahkam, I mean epistemologically he's doing exactly the same thing. Meaning that the source of knowledge comes from interpretation of texts of the Quran and especially Hadith and the sayings of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. What is different is simply that in ahkam and fiqh, you are writing about stuff that the fuqaha have typically been writing about because that's part of the legal education. That is what a mufti needs in ibadat and mu'amalat. Whereas when you're writing in al-Adab al-Shariyya, that is, you're using the same epistemology, same authorities, and that is why I mentioned the authorities and the epistemology specifically to make this point. They're using the same sources, same method. Unlike, we might say, for example, in contemporary period, we might use, in ethics, we might use experience. Or in Dr. Ghaly's presentation, for example, is Galanic tradition and the physician's own experience that creates and generates that wisdom. In this case, you do not have other sources of epistemology. You don't have other knowledge that is modifying or in any significant way modifying the ethical discourse. It does happen in Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah where there is an experiential element. But again, it also has an epistemological unification in the sense that you do not say that, look, in ethics we are going to go with our fitra or our sense of what feels right. Or we're going to even, use the scripture differently. We're going to look at general verses rather than specific verses. We're going to look at some kind of stories rather than ahkam. There is really no epistemological difference. That's all I meant.
Okay. Thank you very much for our both speakers. I pass the mic on to the organizer. No, organizer.
Okay, so just the last sentence, based on what you said, Dr. Ovamir, so there is no difference between theology, philosophy, usul fiqh and adab. So because we use the same epistemology for all, Here we are talking about disciplines and the disciplines that were shaped or defined by the author himself, because we are talking about systematic disciplines that were established very well based on the same epistemology. So we have, of course, we are not going to be to go beyond Quran and Hadith for all the different disciplines at the end. Okay.
No, I did. So if I may, at least give my perspective on this, I'll give you an example of a distinction. The Ash'ari, for example, make a clear distinction between when they're talking about usul and they're talking about fiqh. When they're talking about aqliyat, when they're talking about Sharia. In aqliyat, they don't use the Quran and the Sunnah, they use aql. And in fact, especially in Ash'arism, this distinction is central because it is a fundamental premise that you do not use naql when it comes to masail ilmiya and masail aqliya. Whereas when you pass over to Sharia sciences, then you do not use aql independently of naql. You use only naql. Why? Because aql does not do tahsin and taqbih. It doesn't have that capacity. So there are two alternate realms. In the first realm, you don't use naql, and the second realm, you don't use aql. You do not have that for our authors here. It's the same epistemological realm, and you could say that yes, there is a discipline difference in that they are focusing on different questions. And if that's what you mean by discipline, yes, but typically disciplines develop in differences in different sort of ways. So some disciplines may be, say for example, anthropology and sociology. There was a time when anthropology was focused on exotic societies in Africa and Polynesia and elsewhere, whereas sociology was modern society. They used different sources. There were different disciplines, studied different areas. Their methods were completely different. That's no longer the case today, where anthropologists and sociologists they both study both kinds of societies, and they study both kinds of empirical data and interpretive data and philosophical sources and scientific information. And I would say here that today, the difference between anthropology and sociology as different disciplines is really much, much less relevant than it was once before. In the same way, when the Hanbalis are doing Fiqh and when they're doing Adab, the difference is much smaller because their epistemological source is the same. Whereas when Miskawayh does ethics, it is completely different. His truth and his understanding of human psychology comes from completely different sources. The same person may, when he does fiqh and prayer, he may be a Hanafi or a Shafi'i, but when it comes to his ethics, he was living in a different world. That is not the case here. That's all I meant to say.
Okay, this is a very long discussion, and I still find it problematic, but I'm not going to argue now against this because we have other Hanbalis that they use rational. And by the way, if you read the introduction by Shu'aib al-Adab, for example, to al-Adab al-Shariyya, he was not happy with some of the book the book of Ibn Muflih because he was relying on social norms. Because he said that this is not religious. Shu'aib al-Adab himself, the one who edited the book. Okay, so thank you very much for everybody, for the presenters, the speakers, and the attendees. Thanks for your questions, for the moderators. Thank you for the moderators too. And see you tomorrow, inshallah, at the same time, 1 o'clock afternoon, Doha time. So see you, inshallah.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.